In a dim San Francisco kitchen, 14-year-old Emma kneads dough beside her tired grandma. While scribbling patterns on flour sacks, she stumbles on a 1.4B crop yield fix. Harvard gave up on. Mocked as a silly bakery girl, she fights to be heard. One bag of flour, one silent vow. Can the girl who bakes for hunger prove the world wrong? Emma's fingers were dusted with flour when the power flickered again. She didn't flinch. She was used to the dark. The hum of the old fridge stopped, then started again with a sigh, like the building itself was tired. The kitchen was small, cramped between peeling cabinets and a stove with one working burner. The light above buzzed dim yellow. Her grandmother, Lita, coughed from the corner. "You all right, Grandma?" Emma asked without looking up, kneading dough like it held secrets. "I'm fine, mijita, just this cold gets into my bones." Emma nodded. She'd heard that cough for months now. Her grandma's medicine had run out 2 weeks ago. The free clinic was overbooked. The waiting list was numbered in months. On the table, scattered beside the flour bag and eggshells, were crumpled food wrappers. Emma smoothed one flat. It was from a protein bar. She turned it over, squinting at the nutrition label like it was a math puzzle. Her fingers traced the column: nitrogen, potassium, trace minerals. Again and again, she'd read these labels: ingredients, values, patterns, not because she liked food science, because they were all she had. "Look what I found," Emma said softly, mostly to herself. "What's that, baby?" Emma pointed at the wrapper, then at the flour bag. "This brand, it's got more phosphorus than the other one, but the wheat's from the same place. It's the soil. It's gotta be." Lita smiled weakly. "You always see things others don't." Emma shrugged, brushing her hands on her apron. The apron was too big, a leftover from the bakery where she worked after a school, part-time, under the table, no papers, just need. Her shoes were wet from the rain that had followed her home. The city didn't care about puddles when you were 14 and invisible. "Can I bake one more batch?" she asked. Lita raised an eyebrow. "We've already done 6 trays today." "Just one more. I've got an idea." Lita waved her hand in mock surrender. "Fine, but don't stay up too late." The oven groaned as Emma opened it. She glanced again at the flour sack. Brown, creased, the logo faded. On the back, she had scribbled a sketch with a pencil so worn it was more eraser than graphite. Circles, arrows, ratios. Her own little map of nutrients, drawn by hand from nothing but memory and wrappers. The sack had become her notebook. She folded it carefully each night and hid it behind the rice bin. That night, she didn't sleep. The rain tapped on the windows like impatient questions. Her pencil moved across the sack again, slower now. There were variables she couldn't name, just shapes and feelings, how roots bent toward water, how certain grains needed less to give more. It was all there. She just didn't know the language for it yet. At school, they didn't offer advanced science. The counselor had called her smart for her situation. Whatever that meant, they had no lab, no greenhouse, no budget. Emma didn't mind. She had Google on her grandma's cracked phone and a part-time job kneading dough that taught her about chemistry more than any textbook had. She remembered last month when her class went on a field trip to Golden Gate Park. The science exhibit had a rotating display about sustainable agriculture. Emma had lingered at the back, watching a video about crop yield failures. It showed red zones across global maps, predictions, models, words like unsolved anomalies. Harvard's name had flashed briefly at the bottom. That night, she had drawn her first nutrient cycle on the flour sack. Not because she thought she could fix anything, just because something in the data felt wrong. "Grandma?" she whispered, not knowing if Lita was still awake. "I think the soil's not broken. I think the way they're reading it is." The light flickered again. Emma didn't notice. She was already reaching for another wrapper. A cough answered her from the other room, followed by silence. She held the sack tighter, not out of fear, out of defiance. Outside, the bakery truck rumbled past, its headlights briefly lighting the dark window. Emma stood there, fingers gripping that flour sack like it was more than paper. It was her beginning. Emma stood behind the bakery counter, the smell of cinnamon and yeast heavy in the morning air. Her apron was dusted with flour. The brown sack she'd drawn on last night was folded neatly in her coat pocket. Customers came and went. Her hands moved out of habit, bagels in one hand, tongs in the other, but her mind was far away, retracing lines on that sack like they held something urgent. At 10:03 a.m., a man in a rumpled blazer walked in, phone pressed to his ear. He wasn't from the neighborhood. Emma knew because he didn't glance at the display. He didn't even smell the bread. "I'm telling you, Michael, it's useless," the man snapped into the phone. "We ran the soil simulations 5 times. Same error. Yield drops 22% even in neutral zones." Emma froze. "I don't care who you bring in. It's not a coding problem. It's the variables, the underlying models wrong." He paced near the register, annoyed, unaware of the girl watching him from behind the pastry rack. "I'm not wasting more time. Tell Harvard we're done. Let them fix their own formula." He hung up, ordered black coffee, and walked out before it finished brewing. Emma blinked, heart hammering. Yield, soil, formula. She walked to the window and watched him disappear down the block. The bakery owner, Mrs. Navarro, called from the back. "You okay, mija?" "I heard something I can't ignore," Emma murmured barely above a whisper. She slipped off her apron, grabbed the coffee he didn't take, and stepped outside into the wind. Her fingers tightened around the cup. That night, she unfolded the flour sack again. Her pencil, a broken stub wrapped in tape, scratched against the brown surface. She circled her nutrient loop, drew an arrow, then she stopped. Her lips parted. "They're reading the yield as a fixed output," she whispered. "But what if it's responsive?" She grabbed an old receipt and did rough math, referencing the back of a cereal box for nutrient data. She scribbled in the margins. The numbers didn't match up, not perfectly, but the pattern held. The next morning, she took the sack to the public library 3 blocks down. It was quiet inside except for a broken fan rattling in the corner. She found an old agricultural journal, flipped pages until her fingers hurt. Then she saw it, an article by a Harvard agronomist, Professor Denner. She recognized the name from the phone call. The article was dense. Equations, graphs, yield predictions for sub-Saharan soil types. Emma read it twice, then a third time. Something didn't fit. The error margins were wrong, not off by much, but off enough to matter, she whispered. They're using a closed nutrient loop, but the soil doesn't behave that way. She pulled out the sack and traced the path she'd drawn days ago. Open loops, reactive cycles. Her grandma had once said, "The earth listens when you feed it right." The librarian glanced over at her pile of wrappers and receipts. "You working on a school project?" Emma looked up. "No, just trying to solve something someone gave up on." Later that week, Mrs. Navarro handed her a box of leftover baguettes. "You should rest. You've been working too hard." Emma smiled. "I'm working on something." In her room, she sketched the soil behavior model again, this time on recycled cardboard. The flour sack was tearing at the folds. She taped it carefully, whispering to herself, "What if root absorption varies with cycle timing, not just mineral content?" The thought hit her like a bell. She added another arrow, then another. Soon, the whole cardboard was filled with layered loops, like a dance of roots and soil, talking in chemistry. Her grandma knocked on the door, voice weak. "Dinner, mija?" "In a minute," Emma called back, staring at the final line on the journal page. "Further work discontinued due to irreconcilable error margins." She traced that sentence with her pencil, then circled it. A discarded problem, a $1.4 billion yield crisis, and a bakery girl with a taped pencil, a torn sack, and too much hunger in her past to walk away. The question was no longer if she saw something real. It was, would anyone listen? Rain tapped the window like quiet questions. Emma sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, the cardboard model spread across linoleum worn soft by time. Torn flour sacks, crumpled food labels, receipts. Her entire theory sketched in layers, taped into loops. Her pencil, now a nub barely longer than her thumb, trembled in her hand. "I see it differently now," she whispered. Lita shuffled in, wrapped in a faded shawl, her slippers dragging. She looked down at the floor, blinking at the sea of taped paper and pencil marks. "What is all this, mija?" Emma glanced up. "It's hard to explain. The crops, the problem they can't solve. I think, no, I know, they're modeling it wrong. The soil isn't broken. It's talking. We're just not listening the right way." Lita smiled softly. "That sounds like you." Emma stood and gestured toward the looping arrows. "See how the nutrients cycle in and out? Most models treat it like a one-way street. But what if it's more like kneading dough? You press, you rest, the ingredients respond to timing." Lita chuckled, settling into the worn armchair. "So the earth needs time to breathe." "Yes," Emma lit up. "And no one's measuring that rhythm. They're forcing it into numbers that don't flex." She looked back at her creation. It didn't look like science. It looked like a child's collage. Torn corners, coffee stains, smudged lines. But it made sense. It moved in her head like music. Later that evening, Emma wrapped the cardboard in a trash bag to protect it from the rain. She tied it with a string, her fingers raw from tape and edges. Outside, the streets glistened under flickering lamplight. Potholes held puddles like quiet secrets. She walked 2 blocks to the bakery, the model tucked under her arm. Mrs. Navarro was locking up. "Emma?" she asked, surprised. "You need something?" "Just space," Emma said. "I'll clean up after, I promise." Mrs. Navarro studied her face, then handed her the keys. "Leave the door propped. I'll say you're testing dough." Inside, the bakery was still warm. Emma cleared the prep table and laid out her model. The humming of the fridge filled the silence. Flour dust swirled in the air. She opened the bag and unfolded the cardboard, setting bags of sugar on the corners to hold it flat. She stared for a long time. Then she reached for the chalk near the mixing station and began marking the floor. Arrows, loops, ratios. Each line connected something living. Root density to rainfall, sunlight to mineral release. Everything she'd observed while baking, how dough behaved under pressure, how flour absorbed moisture differently depending on heat, applied here. She dropped to her knees and drew a final arc. Then she stood, breathing hard. From above, the floor looked like a galaxy of cycles, and at the center was a ripped piece of the flour sack, taped to the table's edge, its logo faded to beige and gray, her symbol of perseverance. Her phone buzzed, a message from school. Science fair canceled due to budget. She stared at the screen. A beat passed. Then she opened the camera app and began taking pictures. Each section, each label, each loop. She uploaded them to the old email account her teacher had helped her make once. Then she typed a subject line, "To the Harvard Agronomy Department." No greeting, no credentials, just one sentence. "Your yield model is broken. This might fix it." She hit send. Then she stared at the screen, heart racing, silence, nothing. Outside, wind shook the trees. Inside, Emma folded the cardboard carefully, taping it tighter where it had torn. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but because she knew something had shifted. She wasn't just the girl behind the counter. She was the girl who saw what no one else would see, sketched in chalk, taped to cardboard, and sent into the unknown. And for the first time, she believed she was right. The email sat unopened for 4 days. Emma checked her inbox every hour, between school, baking shifts, and wiping down countertops. Nothing. No reply. Not even a bounce back. On the 5th morning, something new appeared. Subject: regarding your soil model. It was brief, a line from Professor Denner himself. "I'm speaking at the Civic Science Forum in SF. Bring your floor scribbles. Let's end this curiosity." Emma stared at it, her stomach twisted. She printed the photos, taped her torn flour sack together one more time, replaced the broken pencil with a pen she borrowed from a school. It leaked. Lita kissed her forehead. They don't know what they're about to see. Emma didn't feel brave, but she got on the bus anyway. The Civic Center was buzzing with people in suits, lanyards flashing under bright lights. She walked in holding a bakery box filled not with pastries, but her taped cardboard and models. The security guard looked confused. She kept moving. Inside the forum, Professor Denner stood at a podium, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, hands folded like a judge. Behind him, graphs filled a screen. Words like yield failure and global impact scrolled past. Emma found a corner seat. Her hoodie still smelled like yeast and soap. After the lecture, Denner motioned for her to come forward. She did, hands shaking, box in arms. He didn't smile. "So," he said loudly, enough for others to turn, "you're the girl who emailed me from a Gmail address about soil cycles from a bakery." Scattered laughter. Emma stayed silent. Denner opened the box and unfolded the flour sack like it was a napkin. "You drew this?" With a pencil? On trash? It's not trash, she said quietly. It's a pattern. Denner scoffed. And what are your qualifications, Miss? Emma, no degree, just observations from food labels, crop origins, water response, baking cycles. A man near the podium whispered, "Is this a prank?" Emma's ears burned. She clutched the cardboard tighter. "I know what this looks like," she said, "but the yield errors, they're not broken code. They're blind assumptions. You're ignoring mineral interaction timing, the soil's reacting, and your models are aesthetic." More laughter. Denner shook his head. A bakery girl explaining reactive nitrogen flux. That's rich. Emma stepped forward. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. You model like the soil's a machine, but it's alive. You knead dough too long, it stiffens. Too short, it collapses. The soil's the same. I saw flexes. Denner raised his hands mockingly. Ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a flower philosopher. The audience chuckled again. Emma's cheeks were hot. Her hands clenched around the flour sack. The tears came, but she blinked them back. They laughed, she whispered to herself, but I won't stop. Suddenly, a voice from the back called out, "Let her finish." Heads turned. A younger woman stepped forward, clipboard in hand, Harvard pin on her collar. I saw her data last night. The loops she drew, there's something in them. I ran a test on an archived soil file. Her model predicted yield drop zones we missed. Denner's face tightened. The woman turned to Emma. I'm Dr. Healy, postdoc in agro-response modeling. Your flour sack just outperformed 2 of our simulations. The room fell quiet. Emma swallowed hard. I'm not saying I solved it, she said. I'm saying it's worth a second look. Denner forced a smile. Well then, you've had your moment. He folded the sack and dropped it back in the box, walking off. Emma stood alone at the podium. Her hands shook. Dr. Healy approached. Don't mind him, she said. You've done more with recycled paper and a pencil than most labs with grants. Emma looked at the box. No, she said softly. It's not just paper. It's everything we threw away. And in that crowded hall of skeptics and scientists, a bakery girl with a leaking pen and a taped flour sack became more than a curiosity. She became a question no one could laugh off again. 2 days after the forum, Emma stood outside the Harvard Extension Center's conference room, gripping her recycled paper notebook so tightly the spine bent. Inside, the room buzzed with quiet tension. Professors, grad students, and postdocs huddled around data projections. She felt the weight of every stare the moment she stepped in. Professor Denner was already speaking, his voice cold. She wanted to be heard. Well, now she is. Emma took a deep breath and moved forward. He pointed to the whiteboard. This is your chance, bakery girl. Our yield model's producing false positives again. You claim to understand what we missed. He turned, eyes sharp. So prove it. Fix it. Or get out. A hush fell. Emma blinked. You mean now? Yes. In front of us. No flour sacks, no pity, no time. She looked around. The board was filled with formulas, linear regressions, soil profile overlays, static loops. Your current loop is missing timing vectors, she said softly. That's why it fails in zones 4 and 7. Denner crossed his arms. Show us. Emma pulled a pen from her pocket. It was the same one that leaked in the bakery. She uncapped it slowly, stepped to the board, and began drawing. Her hand trembled. One by one, she sketched loops, not circles, but spirals, layered with micro delays in inputs, moisture variation, mineral absorption. She connected nodes across seasons, not seconds. "What is this?" a student muttered. Emma turned. "You think soil responds instantly. It doesn't. It waits. It flexes." Another student scoffed. "That's not how we code systems." Emma didn't flinch. "Maybe that's why your systems fail." She kept drawing, her recycled notebook open beside her, pages covered in smudged calculations from late nights and baking shifts. It looked like chaos, but every line had meaning. Denner interrupted. "You have 6 hours." She froze. "What?" He smirked. 6 hours? That's when the board meets to decide if we shelve this project. Show us something that works, or the door's behind you." He walked out without waiting. Emma stood still. The whiteboard loomed in front of her like a mountain. Dr. Healy stepped forward quietly. "He's testing you." "I know," Emma whispered. "You okay?" "No," Emma said. Then she looked down at her notebook. "But I'll do it anyway." The room emptied slowly. One by one, the skeptics left, muttering to themselves. Only Healy stayed. Emma pulled out her notebook, flattening the creased pages. She used a ruler she found on the table to refine the graph's axes. The ink ran, she adjusted. She had no lab, no software, no simulations, just cardboard logic, pen pressure, and instinct. As the hours passed, her hand ached. The lines on the whiteboard spread. She created a color-coded timing overlay using highlighters from Healy's bag: green for water response, yellow for heat stress, red for nutrient re-entry, blue for adaptive root signaling. At the 3-hour mark, Healy looked over her shoulder. "You're layering feedback timing into the uptake model?" Emma nodded. "The crops aren't failing, the soil's misfiring, it's out of rhythm. And your model teaches it how to breathe again." She didn't answer, just kept working. At 5 hours, Denner returned. He glanced at the board, unimpressed. "So, another pretty pattern?" Emma stood back, wiped sweat from her brow, and handed him her final page. "Run this on your Zone 7 data, just the topsoil variables, no deep root bias." Denner raised an eyebrow, scanned it, then tapped on his laptop. A few students peeked back in, curious. The projection screen blinked, then flashed a yield estimate, plus 18.7% over the control. The room fell silent. Emma exhaled. Denner stared. "You did this with a leaking pen?" Emma looked at her notebook. "That and nights in a bakery." He didn't smile, but he didn't speak either. Dr. Healy whispered, "I think you just bought yourself a seat." Emma looked down at her notebook, the recycled pages now dotted with a sweat and ink, her symbol of resistance. "I'll show you," she said, voice steady. "And I'm not leaving." The bakery closed at 8 p.m. sharp. By 8:30, Emma was sweeping flour into the corners, the hum of the walk-in cooler behind her. She wiped her hands on her apron and grabbed her box of papers, now thicker with printed soil maps and hand-drawn overlays. Her recycled notebook peeked from the edge, its corners soft, its pages frayed and spotted with tape. She slipped out the back, the streetlight flickering above her. San Francisco wind curled around her hoodie. Home was 6 blocks away, but tonight, she didn't go there. Instead, she turned toward the old church basement on Clement Street. The janitor, Mr. Rivera, knew her by name. "Back again?" he asked with a chuckle. Emma smiled. "Just a couple hours." He handed her the spare key. "You've got till midnight." The basement was cold, but it was quiet. One table, one flickering bulb, and a stack of folding chairs. She set her box down, spread out the soil diagrams, and opened her notebook. She rubbed her eyes. Her fingers were stained with ink and highlighter, but she kept going. "I won't give up," she whispered, marking another time lag adjustment. The last test had increased predicted yields, but only in humid zones. The arid cycles were still failing. Something was missing. She sketched the nutrient curve again. Oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, then paused. What if it wasn't the minerals? What if it was the microbes? She reached for the food wrapper she'd saved, granola, organic. On the back, it listed soil-derived bacterial strains used to enrich the oats. She laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was right there. She drew a new spiral, added a layer for microbial density, then another for respiration timing. Her pencil broke. She sighed, reached for her backup, a short yellow stub worn from sharpening. By 10:45, the floor was covered in papers. Arrows connected page to page like the spider webs. She'd used duct tape to build a timeline across the linoleum. Oxygen intake, bacterial activity, moisture variance. Every factor danced around one question: when does soil come alive again? At 11:20, her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since lunch. She pulled out a half-eaten bread roll, tore off a piece, and chewed slowly, eyes still on the map. Then the breakthrough came. She noticed it in a corner of a test graph she'd copied. Zone 9, a failed zone. On day 22 of the drought simulation, the microbial levels rose instead of dropped. Just slightly. She circled it. "No one saw this," she whispered. They dismissed it as data noise, but it was a signal. She flipped to her notebook and wrote a new hypothesis in the margin. Post-stress recovery triggers soil to rebound if given a pause between inputs. It wasn't about nutrients. It was about rest. Just like dough. She stood, backed up, and stared at the taped timeline across the floor. It pulsed in her head like breath. Cycles of strain and rest. She pulled her phone from her coat and snapped a picture. Then another. Then the whole room. By midnight, her eyes were red and her shoulders sagged. She gathered her notes, folding them carefully. The notebook slid into her bag last, now thicker with discovery. She shut the lights, stepped out into the cold, and walked the 6 blocks home, gripping the bag like it held her heart. Inside the apartment, Lita was asleep in the chair, a blanket half draped over her, a kettle still warm. Emma kissed her forehead, then slipped into her room. She placed the notebook under her pillow. Tomorrow, she would present this at Harvard, not with a lab, not with a title, but with truth taped together across a church basement floor and a broken pencil that refused to quit. The lecture hall was packed. Rows of students, faculty, and visiting researchers murmured behind glowing screens. The announcement had been vague. New soil recovery model presented by independent contributor. No title, no lab, just intrigue. Emma stood backstage, her heart pounding. Her recycled notebook was clutched in both hands, the cover soft and bent. Inside, her new model waited, layered, taped, drawn in highlighter and broken pencil. Dr. Healy appeared beside her, whispering, "You ready?" Emma nodded, even though her hands were cold. "They don't know it yet," Healy added, "but this will change everything." Professor Denner walked up last, adjusting his jacket. He looked at Emma with unreadable eyes. "You have 10 minutes," he said. "Don't waste them." Then he stepped aside. Emma walked onto the stage, boots quiet against the tile. The lights were brighter than she'd imagined. Her fingers trembled as she placed the notebook on the podium and looked up. A screen behind her lit up with the first slide. Hand-drawn loops layered over faded soil grids. Not polished, not pretty, but real. She took a breath. "I'm Emma," she began. "I work in a bakery, but I grew up watching food labels, nutrient breakdowns, mineral patterns. I started noticing things about how soil behaves after a stress, after drought, after we stop feeding it." A few chuckles in the crowd. Someone muttered, "Seriously?" Emma didn't stop. She flipped the page, showing the microbial spike graph. This one point, Zone 9, Day 22, was dismissed as data noise, but I saw a pattern, a breath. She tapped the circled spike with her finger. "So I built a model, not based on what the soil gives now, but what it remembers. Cycles of strain and rest, microbial rebound, a living rhythm." The room quieted. She turned to the next slide. A photo of the church basement floor, taped timelines, highlighted spirals, gasps. "That's her model?" someone whispered. She pressed on. "Using this framework, I ran 6 simulations by hand. No lab, but my predictions aligned with actual recovery zones missed by Harvard's current model." Dr. Healy stood in the back, smiling faintly. Emma pulled the final page from her notebook, held it up. "This is the equation." Silence. Then a student in the second row raised their hand. "This was drawn on cardboard?" Emma nodded. "Flour sack, the first one. I didn't have paper." Another voice asked, "And this predicted yield returns in failing soil?" Emma nodded again. "By up to 19%. A third voice, skeptical, harsh. "Show us, right now." Professor Denner stepped forward. "She already did," he said quietly. Eyes turned to him. He tapped his tablet. The main screen flashed, showing side-by-side comparisons. Harvard's model and Emma's. Yield recovery, color-coded. Emma's predictions lit up like stars. Accurate, precise. Murmurs erupted. A professor in the third row whispered, "I never saw that coming." Emma stepped back from the podium, notebook still in her hand. Her fingers tightened around it. "I didn't mean to solve a billion-dollar problem," she said. "I just wanted to feed the world, like my grandma tried to feed me." The hall was still, then applause. Not polite, real, growing. Denner didn't clap, but he didn't speak either. Dr. Healy stepped forward, took the mic. "This changes how we think about soil, about failure, about who gets to see what others miss." She turned to Emma. "You did it." Emma looked down at her notebook. The cover now smudged with chalk and sweat, the same broken pencil tucked inside. Her voice cracked. "No, we did." everyone who ever got laughed at for asking a better question. In the middle of Harvard's brightest minds, a bakery girl with a notebook full of recycled hope had just shifted the ground beneath their feet. And this time, no one laughed. The applause had faded, the lights dimmed, and Emma sat alone in the back hallway of the lecture building, notebook in her lap, the broken pencil resting across its spine like a bookmark. Her fingers trembled not from fear, but from everything she had held in too long. Dr. Healy approached quietly, kneeling beside her. "You okay?" Emma nodded once. "It worked." Healy smiled. "It did." Emma looked at the notebook, eyes glassy. "But they still don't know why I really did it." Healy tilted her head. "Then tell them." Emma hesitated. Then she turned to the last page of the notebook, a photo, taped crooked in the corner. A woman in a headscarf, smiling at a tray of fresh bread. Lida, 20 years younger. "She was everything," Emma whispered. "When I was 5, we lost our garden. Drought wiped it out. We had no money, no car, and the store shelves were always half empty." Healy listened, quiet. Emma continued. "One night, she served me a bowl of rice and said she'd already eaten. I didn't know until later. She hadn't eaten in 2 days." Her voice cracked. "She used to say, 'The land remembers, mija. You just have to listen when it speaks back.'" I thought she was being poetic, but she wasn't. Emma lifted the pencil. This was hers. She used it to do budgets on junk mail envelopes. When she got sick, I found it on the windowsill, like she'd left it for me. Healy swallowed. "She'd be proud of you." Emma nodded, eyes locked on the photo. "After she passed, I didn't cry. I baked. Every day I kneaded dough like I was trying to hold her together. And one night, I saw it, the pattern, the way flour rests, the way soil should too. It wasn't science yet. It was just love. It was grief." There was a silence between them, gentle, wide. Then Healy said, "You should tell that story." Emma looked up. "Why?" "Because science can't always see the heart behind the data, but people can." Later that evening, back at the apartment, Emma stood at the kitchen counter. The lights flickered like always. Her fingers traced the cracked edge of the ceramic bowl Lida used to keep flour in. She opened the notebook again, flipping past diagrams and equations until she reached the photo. She stared at it. Then she spoke aloud, like her grandma was listening. "I'm feeding the world, one line at a time." She closed the notebook and set it on the table, beside the empty bowl and the folded apron. The next morning, she returned to campus. This time, she wasn't asked to prove herself. She was invited to speak, not about equations, about why she built them. The hall was smaller, more intimate, no projections, no charts, just Emma, her notebook, and the broken pencil in her hand. "I used to think no one would listen to someone like me," she said. "I used to think being poor meant being invisible." She looked at the audience. "But hunger isn't invisible. Not when it lives in your house. Not when you lose someone to it." She held up the pencil. "This isn't fancy, but it taught me more than any textbook ever did." Someone in the back whispered, "She's doing this for her grandmother." Emma heard it, and she smiled. "I am," she said, "but not just for her." She looked at the front row. Students, professors, silent, leaning in. "I'm doing this for every kid who's ever been told to stay in their lane. Every girl who thought science was out of reach. Every hand that needed bread and never imagined it could shape the future. The applause was quiet this time, but it was real, and Emma walked off a stage, notebook in hand, her grandmother's memory stitched into every page. The soil would breathe again, because someone dared to listen. Emma stepped into the hallway outside the soil lab and felt the shift. Conversations stopped. Eyes turned. No one smiled. Her recycled notebook was tucked under her arm, the broken pencil marking the page she had just updated, microbial timing variations for arid climates. She clutched it tighter. Dr. Healy met her by the door, expression unreadable. "They called a meeting," she said quietly. "Department faculty only, no guests." Emma blinked. "But it's my model." Healy nodded. "That's the problem." Emma didn't speak. She just watched as the door closed behind Healy, leaving her alone in the corridor. Inside, voices rose. She couldn't hear the words, but she felt them. Cold, clipped, suspicious. At the far end of the hallway, two graduate students leaned against the wall. One of them muttered, "I mean, is any of it even hers? She's not a student, no credentials." The other shrugged. She could have just copied someone else's theory and drawn it on flour sacks. Who would know? Emma stared at the floor, her hands shaking. They were rewriting her story without her. 30 minutes later, Healy stepped out, pale. "They're reviewing your data again," she said. "Some faculty are demanding third-party verification." Emma's voice was low. "Do they think I faked it?" Healy didn't answer. Emma leaned against the wall, her knees weak. "I knew it wouldn't last. They'll erase me." "No," Healy said, stepping closer. "They're scared. That's different, but you're not leaving." Emma looked up. Healy continued, "Stand your ground. They can't take what you've built." Later that day, Emma returned to her workspace, or tried to. The door was locked. A printed notice taped to the glass read, "Temporary restriction due to unauthorized usage of departmental space. Please contact administration." She stared at the sign, then at the window. Her papers were still inside, so was the notebook's duplicate she'd started copying last week. She pressed her forehead to the glass. Behind her, a janitor walked by and paused. "You okay?" Emma nodded. "Just forgot my key." He smiled kindly and unlocked the door. Inside, the room smelled like chalk and dust. The cardboard model on the floor had been moved. Her diagrams were stacked in the corner, out of order. But the original notebook, her worn one, the one that mattered, was still in her bag. She sat on the floor, pulled it out, and opened to the page with Lita's photo. The pencil rested in the crease. Her fingers traced the edge of the tape. "They can move my papers," she whispered, "but they can't move this." A knock on the open door startled her. It was Denner. He looked down at her on the floor, then at the notebook in her lap. "Some of the board thinks you're a liability," he said. "No formal training, no data logs approved through institutional review. You understand the risk you pose to their reputations?" Emma looked up. "And you?" she asked. "What do you think?" He paused. "I think," he said slowly, "that your model shouldn't work. But it does." He turned to go, then stopped. "And if it's really yours, you'll survive the fire." When he left, Emma stared at the doorway. Survive the fire. She looked around the room. Her diagrams were scattered. but they were still here. Her story wasn't done. That night, she returned to the church basement. She taped a new sheet of recycled paper to the floor and began again, mapping, layering, revising, not because they believed in her, but because the soil still breathed and she was still listening. The faculty chamber was crowded, dark wood walls, cold light overhead. A long table stretched across the center, lined with professors in tailored suits, some curious, most skeptical. Emma stood at the edge, notebook in hand, her broken pencil tucked into the spine. Beside her, Dr. Healy adjusted a flash drive in the podium's laptop. They wanted proof, she whispered. Let's give them more than that. Emma nodded, heart pounding. Professor Denner entered last, expression unreadable. He didn't sit. He folded his arms and waited. Dr. Healy cleared her throat. We're here to present raw data logs from the soil reactivity trials, Phase 2, run independently, verified, compared side by side with Miss Emma Alvarez's predictions. A few faculty members exchanged looks. She's not a student, one said flatly. She's not registered, another added. Healy turned to Emma. Emma took a breath. This is my work, she said. No one taught it to me. I didn't steal it. I built it. In a kitchen, in a church basement, on bags of flour, on paper no one wanted. Silence. Healy clicked to the first slide. Side by side yield maps. Harvard's model on the left, flat zones, mist regions. Emma's model on the right, color-synced bursts of green, accurate, layered, dynamic. Professor Denner leaned forward. Healy continued. We uploaded her microbial rhythm model into an open-source simulator last week, ran it against 127 real-world plots in the USDA archive. Results matched field returns within 3%. That's higher accuracy than any of our current predictive tools. A murmur swept the table. A professor at the far end raised a brow. Who ran the comparison? Another voice answered from the door. I did. The room turned. A man stepped in. Tall, mid-50s, silver hair. Dean Coulter, chair of environmental analytics. He wasn't scheduled to attend. He held up a printed stack of outputs. I heard rumors, he said, so I pulled the raw input data myself. I didn't believe it either. He laid the papers on the table. But the patterns hold. She's not replicating our models. She's redefining them. Emma's hand trembled slightly. She gripped the notebook tighter. Dean Coulter turned to her. You saw timing delays where we saw static decay. You modeled microbial shifts we wrote off as noise. I've taught for 30 years. I've never seen this. One professor leaned back. But how do we know she really built it? Emma opened her notebook, turned to the page with the first cycle sketch. Dated? Smudged. Coffee stain in the corner. Lita's handwriting in the margin. Keep going, mija. She placed it gently on the table. No lab made this, she said. No software. Denner stepped forward. For a long moment, he just stared. Then he said flatly, they can't deny it now. Emma looked up at him. You still don't believe it, do you? He didn't answer. Dean Coulter spoke instead. Belief isn't the point. The results speak. The yield improvements alone could save millions in failed harvest zones. Another professor asked, and what do we do with her? Emma stepped forward, voice steady. I don't want your titles or your approval. I want to finish what I started. I want to publish the full model, open source, so no kid ever loses a garden the way I did. The room was quiet again. Dean Coulter smiled faintly. We'll need to talk about authorship, about recognition. He turned to the rest of the board. But as of today, let the record show the Alvarez yield model is officially validated. Emma's eyes stung. She looked down at the broken pencil in her hand. Still writing, still hers, still enough. The air was crisp in the Harvard courtyard. Students passed by with backpacks and lattes, the usual chatter echoing beneath red brick walls. Emma sat on a stone bench near the fountain, her notebook in her lap, the broken pencil tucked neatly inside its spine. She'd barely slept. The validation had gone public. Her name, once whispered in hallways, was now printed in research bulletins and mentioned in faculty group chats. But with it came more questions. Legal agreements, publication rights, system access, she still didn't have. Then came the message, Dean Coulter wants to see you. His office, noon. Now she waited outside his door, hands cold despite the sun. It opened. Come in, he said, voice calm. His office smelled like old books and fresh coffee. A tall window looked out over the quad. A single photo sat on his desk. A woman in a field kneeling beside a wheat crop. He gestured to the chair across from him. Emma sat, clutching the notebook tighter. I read your latest revisions, he said. The delayed microbial phase response? Elegant. She nodded quietly. He leaned forward. You've done something here that no one else did. Not just because you saw what we didn't, but because you listened to what the land was saying. She exhaled. So, now what? Coulter smiled. Now, we build. She blinked. We? I want you in the department, not as a guest, not as an exception, as a student, a full scholarship, living stipend, lab access, full authorship on your work. You've earned every inch of it. Emma stared at him. You believe in me? I do, he said. And more than that, we need you. She looked down at the notebook in her hands, the cover soft with time, the pencil worn to half its size. But I didn't come from here, she said. I came from a bakery and a busted oven. I studied food labels, not textbooks. He nodded. Exactly. You studied truth, not theory. That's why you saw what we missed. A beat of silence. Then Coulter reached into his drawer and slid a folder across the desk. Inside is your official offer. You'll need to sign. But first, there's something I want to say. Emma looked up. We failed you, he said, not just by doubting your work, but by building a system that makes someone like you feel like they don't belong. That ends now. Emma's throat tightened. Her voice came out softer than she expected. My grandma, she always said I'd have to work twice as hard just to be seen. I guess she was right. Coulter nodded again. And now, we'll make sure no one like you ever has to kneel at the door to be heard. He stood, held out his hand. Emma rose, shook it, her fingers still shaking. When she stepped out of the office, the sun felt warmer. She crossed the quad slowly, each step sinking in. At the edge of the courtyard, Dr. Healy was waiting. Well, she asked. Emma handed her the folder. Healy flipped through it, eyebrows rising. Full scholarship? Emma nodded. Title? Research associate, Emma said, almost laughing. With co-authorship on the model. Healy smiled. You did it. Emma opened the notebook, flipped to the photo of Lita. "No," she said softly. "We did." Then she slipped the broken pencil into the spiral again. It had been enough to draw the model, enough to get through ridicule, enough to change their minds, and now it was enough to begin again, this time with a seat at the table. The auditorium lights dimmed, then rose again in soft gold. A single banner stretched across the stage. Emerging voices in agriscience, honoring breakthrough innovation. Emma sat in the front row, her new university ID clipped to her jacket. Her fingers clutched the edge of her notebook, the same one she'd carried from bakery to boardroom. Inside it, her broken pencil rested quietly, worn down, still hers. Dean Coulter stepped up to the podium. His voice echoed across the room. "Tonight, we honor a scholar whose work has already reshaped how we understand recovery cycles in depleted soils. Her insights, drawn not from elite classrooms, but from lived experience, have helped model one of the most accurate yield projections in our department's history." He paused, scanning the audience. "Emma Alvarez." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Emma stood slowly, her heart pounding against her ribs. She walked up the stairs, legs shaky but steady. As she reached the podium, Dean Coulter handed her a certificate embossed in gold. "Harvard undergraduate scholar," it read. "Full academic sponsorship, publication rights, lab fellowship." Coulter leaned close. "You earned this with pencil and purpose." Emma took the mic. "I'm honored," she said softly, "but I didn't do this alone." She held up the notebook. "This is my lab, my calculator, my journal, and somewhere in these pages, my grandmother's voice lives. She taught me to look at the ground not as dirt, but as memory." She looked out into the crowd, eyes finding Dr. Healy near the edge, smiling wide. Then, near the back, her uncle Luis. He'd driven all night to be there, his overalls still dusty from work. "And I did this," she said, voice cracking, "for the woman who gave up meals so I could learn what hunger meant." Silence. Then more applause, longer this time. Later that night, they gathered in the common room of her dorm. Healy, Luis, a few new classmates, even Mrs. Navarro from the bakery who'd flown in that morning. Luis pulled Emma aside, held her shoulders. "She'd be proud," he whispered. Emma wiped her eyes. "I did it for us." She opened the notebook on the table. Her new classmates leaned in. "You really started this on a flour bag?" one of them asked. Emma grinned. "Yeah, the bag was falling apart by the time I taped the final cycle." She turned the page to the first sketch. The pencil mark was faded, the tape peeling at the corners, but it was still there, the loop that started it all. Dr. Healy sat beside her, pointing at the smudged spiral. "We're naming this the Alvarez recovery sequence. Your first model." Emma stared at her. "You're serious?" Healy nodded. "We submitted the final version to the International Soil Forum. They accepted it. You'll be presenting in the fall." Emma blinked. "I thought I'd be lucky to even get through a semester." "You're not lucky," Healy said. "You're prepared." In the quiet hours after the crowd thinned, Emma sat alone at her desk. Her scholarship letter was pinned to the wall above her bed. The certificate lay beside her bag, and her notebook, still open, rested beneath her palms. She turned to the back page, where Lita's photo was taped. "I did it," she whispered. Then she picked up the broken pencil, now sharpened down to a nub, and wrote a single line beneath the picture. You planted the seed, I just listened. And with that, the girl who once studied soil from food wrappers and bakery scraps became the youngest official scholar in Harvard's Agricians program, not because of where she came from, but because of how far she was willing to kneel and listen. The sun beat down over the Central Valley. Dry fields shimmered in the distance. But this field just off Route 63 was different. Green, alive. Emma knelt beside a row of wheat, fingers brushing the dark soil. A local farmer, Mateo Ortiz, stood beside her, arms crossed, face unreadable. We tried everything, he said. Fertilizers, timed irrigation. Nothing took. Emma nodded. You were pushing the system. Your soil needed rest, not rescue. She opened her backpack and pulled out her notebook. The cover was worn, taped at the corners. Inside, hand-drawn cycles danced across smudged pages. The broken pencil still rested in the spine, now sharpened just enough to write. She flipped to the Alvarez recovery sequence, now tested in 6 countries, translated into 3 languages, and officially published. She pointed to the loop for microbial rest phases. Your last drought left your bacteria depleted, but if you stagger input with dormant rainfall windows, the microbes rebound naturally. Mateo raised an eyebrow. So we stop feeding it, and it feeds itself? Emma smiled. Exactly. He shook his head, chuckling. You're younger than my niece, and you just fixed my farm. Down the hill, other fields were turning green too. Pilot zones. Emma's team, half grad students, half locals, were tracking every inch of recovery. It hadn't been easy. Some growers resisted at first, too slow, too soft, too simple. But after the first full harvest cycle, yields spiked by 17%. Now other counties were calling, other countries. Emma stood and walked with Mateo back to the truck where his son waited with a clipboard. You changed our lives, the boy said. My dad sleeps again. He's not scared of the rain anymore. Emma looked at him, eyes full. I did it for people like you, she said. People like my grandma. That evening, she returned to campus where the lab buzzed with energy. Charts, simulations, new soil packets arriving by mail. Dr. Healy waved from across the room. Zone 11 just sent their numbers, she called out. 23% improvement, and the smallholders in Kenya matched it. Emma dropped her bag, breath catching. It's spreading, Healy grinned. Faster than we expected. Emma opened her notebook again, this time to a blank page at the back. She took the pencil, wrote in quiet a script. Soil doesn't just grow food, it grows trust. She stared at the words, then smiled. She walked across the lab to the map wall, dozens of red pins now replaced by green. Recovery zones, each one marked by the Alvarez loop. She turned to Healy. You think Lita would believe this? Healy didn't hesitate. She'd say it's just the beginning. Weeks later, a small ceremony was held at the community center in Emma's old neighborhood. Folding chairs, warm tamales, handmade banners that read, "Welcome home, Emma." Mrs. Navarro hugged her tight, tears in her eyes. You were always more than dough. Louise handed her a wooden frame. Inside, her first taped model on the flour sack. Preserved, protected behind glass. You left it in your old drawer, he said. Figured you'd want to see where it started. Emma held it close. This is everything. A little girl tugged at her sleeve. Is it true, she asked, that you used to write on trash? Emma kneeled. It's not trash, she said. It's memory. She placed the broken pencil in the girl's palm. Keep it. It still writes. The girl beamed. As the crowd cheered, Emma stood beneath a string lights, surrounded by people who once called her invisible. Now, she wasn't just seen. She was believed. The sky above Boston was fading into gold. Emma sat on the rooftop of the university's science building, her notebook open in her lap. The pages rippled gently in the wind. On the last one, a new drawing, a child's hand holding a broken pencil. Down below, the campus buzzed with orientation. Fall was coming. A new generation of students, new voices, new ideas. Emma closed her eyes, letting the breeze brush her face. Footsteps approached behind her. Dr. Healy sat down quietly beside her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. Looks like your rooftop's becoming legend, she said, handing over 1 mug. Emma smiled. I just needed space to think. You've earned that, Healy said. So, what now? Emma stared at the notebook, her fingers grazing the edge of Lita's photo. I thought getting here would feel like an ending, but it doesn't. It feels like a question. Healy sipped her tea. What kind? Emma looked out over the quad. Where are all the other Emmas? The kids sketching on napkins, talking to soil, folding maps into grocery receipts? Healy nodded. Still invisible, still waiting for someone to listen. Emma turned the page. There's a girl in Bakersfield. Her teacher sent me her project. She's 13. She modeled compost respiration using apples and shoe boxes. Healy's eyes widened. Seriously? Emma smiled. Yeah, and it's good. I want to mentor her. Healy raised her mug. That's how it begins. Emma set her notebook down. The cover, soft from years of use, bore tiny scratches, each one a memory. The broken pencil still rested into the spine, shorter now, but whole in its purpose. There's something I've been thinking about, Emma said. We tell kids to chase talent, to rise, to shine, but no one talks about where they have to start. Healy leaned in. Say more. Emma stood slowly, the notebook tucked under her arm. Talent isn't where you need, she said, but where you sow. Healy smiled, quiet and proud. You've shown us the way. Emma looked down at the notebook one last time, then turned her eyes to the horizon. It's not just about proving yourself, she said. It's about building a world where you don't have to. Below, in a classroom near the garden, a group of students gathered for the first day of a new program, Applied Recovery Science and Community Agriculture. The syllabus had her name on it, a new professor, a new purpose, and maybe, just maybe, a new field growing in the hearts of kids who thought they didn't belong. Emma tucked the pencil back into the spine and closed the notebook. Then she whispered into the wind, "Let's feed the world."